He was an innocent victim, killed by a hooded youth near a pub in Liverpool, just yards from his home. He was only 11 years old. The shocking news of Rhys Jones's murder made national headlines as the country faced the serious issue of escalating gun crime and gang violence. It was a crime that terrified every parent in the country. It was a crime that shook Britain. On the 22nd of August 2007, schoolboy Rhys Jones was walking home from football practice. He was shot dead by a teenage gunman on a bike.
My baby was only 11. He didn't deserve this.
The search for his killer was to become one of the biggest investigations Merseyside police had ever seen.
Today we've dedicated a further 100 officers to actually investigating this murder.
Whilst the nation demanded justice for Rhys's family, a small group closed ranks around the murder.
If you're the killer and you're watching this, turn yourself in.
This is the story of the senseless killing of Rhys Jones, told from the inside through the eyewitness accounts of the family, friends, and detectives at the heart of the case. "11-year-old Rhys Jones lived on the Croxteth Park estate in Liverpool.
Croxteth Park estate, which is predominantly housing estate. There's something like 3,000 privately owned houses. And in the middle of the estate is the Fir Tree pub. And then very close by is the only block of shops on that estate, with a medical centre, a school and a church nearby.
We've lived on that estate for 17 years. I've never felt unsafe. It's a lovely area that we live in.
Obviously seeing groups of kids knocking around, but nothing more than what you do as a youngster yourself.
It's a really lovely looking estate. You drive on it and there's trees, there's woods, there's plenty of greenery. All the houses are nice. With it being private, everyone has a bit more pride in their homes, and it's a lovely looking place.
I'd never had any worries about letting the boys go out and play. We've never had any trouble up there.
Although it's a massive estate, I would say it was quite close, really, because there's only a little block of shops, and obviously that's the centre point of the estate. I think most people know each other.
Rhys lived with his mother Mel, father Steve, and older brother Owen. It was a happy family life, where Rhys was thriving.
We were just like a normal family, Steve works permanent nights. I had a little part-time job. The boys were both at school and both doing really well. Weekends were always a bit special because Steve was always off on a weekend, and we'd always make sure we do things together as a family.
We gave him every encouragement to go out and be active and have a good time.
Rhys was a popular personality and adored by those close to him.
Rhys was a very happy and energetic little boy. He was also very funny and just a really outgoing little boy.
He's one of those lads that you couldn't be mad at for very long. And even if you were mad at him, he'd just make you laugh. He's just lovable and likeable.
Rhys was a cheeky little lad. He was always smiling, always laughing.
He was always playing tricks, and he was dead mischievous. He'd always make mud balls and start throwing them at the kids, and then all the other kids would join in, and I'd just be tearing my hair out, like shouting at him.
But Rhys's biggest passion was football.
I think the passion for football that he has took up all of his life. It was just football. Played for the Fir Tree for about 12 months. I think he played his first season. He was going into playing his second season for them.
He was a good footballer. You could see it from an early age. He could kick the ball further than other kids of his age, and you could see that there was something special about him.
It was a warm and sunny day on the 22nd of August 2007.
I'd been to work in the morning. I came home and Rhys was starting senior schools in the September. So we decided to go to town and get him his new uniform.
I worked permanent nights, so I'd been in bed most of that day. And I got up round about tea time. Obviously, I had my tea. Rhys, I knew was going to go and train.
He'd go training once a week and he'd play a match of a weekend.
We decided that we would get together for an extra training session because the season was due to start on the following Sunday.
But he was more excited because England were playing that night as well. So there was quite a buzz going round in the house because he wanted to get back for the match. He just had a light snack and then he just went up and put his kit on.
Rhys left home and made his way to football.
Rhys always used to take himself to training. As you come out of our house, it would be a 5-7 minute walk on one straight road straight up to the football pitches behind the shops.
The training ground would have been just to the right and slightly set back behind the pub, more or less right next to it, really.
Soon after arriving at football practice, Rhys realised he'd forgotten something.
The training session on that particular evening started about 6 o'clock. I'd asked all the kids to get there. Rhys had forgot his £5 signing on fee. And he went, "Oh, I forgot my money." And you could see him start to panic a little bit. And before I could even say anything, off he'd gone. He'd run home.
Rhys! I was sitting on the settee watching the TV when he came bursting back through the door because he'd forgotten his sign-on money. Obviously, he badgered Mel. And he just sat on the end of the couch waiting patiently for her to give him the money.
Instead of just leaving it and paying next time, he wouldn't. So I gave him his signing on fee, and because he was going to be late, I put him in the car and I drove him the couple of minutes up the road to the training field. He just kissed me on the cheek and said, "Ta-ra, Mum, I'll be home to watch England."
With his subs fully paid, Rhys finally joined his teammates.
We'd done a couple of little warm-up things, you know, we'd run round the field, then we'd do a couple of little stretching exercises. You know, there was just a couple of little exercises like that. And we never really spent much time doing that because I always thought it's better if kids are playing football rather than, you know, doing exercises.
After a successful training session, Rhys was ready to make his way home, looking forward to watching England play Germany that evening.
I was at the back of the car with the boot open, putting stuff in, and Rhys walked past the front of the car. And he said, "Ta-ra." And I said, "Where are you going? How are you getting home?" So he said, "It's all right, I'll walk." I asked Rhys to get in the car 2-3 times. And I even said to him, "No, come on, get in the car, I'll drop you off, it's no problem. Come on." And Rhys was adamant he was walking.
See you, Rhys.
It was a pleasant evening as Rhys made his way home, a journey he had made countless times before, but one that would be his last. "11-year-old schoolboy Rhys Jones was a popular and passionate footballer, adored by friends and family. He had a promising future ahead of him, a future he would be denied. Having turned down a lift from his football coach, Rhys Jones was making his way home on foot. He took his usual shortcut across the Fir Tree pub car park, only 500 yards from his home.
The 22nd of August was a hot summer's evening. The pub was very busy.
On that particular evening, England were playing Germany. A lot of people who were sat outside because of the nice weather and also because of the smoking ban. And Rhys at that time had finished his football practice and was walking a relatively short distance home from the football field.
I jumped in my car and I drove probably 50 yards, and Sean was in the passenger seat and he screamed out Rhys's name. And I looked back, I've seen Rhys hit the floor, and I knew immediately he was hurt. The first thing that entered my head was he slipped. So I slammed the brakes on in the car and I jumped out. But by the time I'd done that, Sean had opened the door and jumped out. So he got to Rhys before I did. Just before I got there, a girl got there. She worked in the pub. This girl had grabbed hold of Rhys. She was trying to administer some sort of first aid. He was lying in like a pool, literally a pool of blood. The girl was shouting to me, he's been shot.
Call an ambulance!
It's just that bit, seeing him. Sean was hysterical. So I'm shouting to Sean, he'll be all right, but I just froze, it was numb, I couldn't have done anything at all. The first thing I done was get my phone out and I phoned the ambulance and the police. And all the time, Sean's running around hysterical and I'm trying to say to Sean, he'll be okay, don't worry.
A distressed Steve didn't have Rhys's home number, so he frantically called local resident and Fir Tree football coach, Tony Edge.
I could hear the panic in his voice, and he said, Tony, I don't know what to do. Rhys has been shot.
I started to shout a little bit. Just get round there and get his mum and get her here now, immediately.
I remember just thinking, what am I going to say? What do you say to his mum or dad when they answer the door?
Shocked and panicked, Tony raced over to the Joneses' family home.
Well, I was just sitting on the settee watching the telly and there was a knock at the door. And I just opened the door and Tony was just standing there.
I said, Steve just rang me and he said Rhys has been shot, but I don't know how bad it is. That's all I know.
And he just went, you just need to come with me now. And I didn't even have the time to think, I just ran into the living room, grabbed my keys and my phone, and I just got in the car.
Well, the distance from Rhys's house to the pub car park was about a minute in the car. We were just really in silence and we were just wanting to get there as soon as possible.
I think I was just in disbelief. I couldn't comprehend what he'd said. I didn't even question what he said. I don't even think I spoke.
A stunned crowd had already started to gather around Rhys.
It seemed like there was hundreds of people all around. I couldn't see anything at first. I got out the car and I just heard someone shout, "Here's his mum." And then as I heard that voice, all the people that were together just sort of stood apart and Rhys was just on the floor. And I just ran over. I could nearly even see where he was hurt. I could just see the pool. He was lying in a pool of blood. I just put my hand under his head and I said, "Come on, Rhys, you're going to be okay, come on. You're going to be okay, I'm here now. It's going to be fine." And people were screaming and where's the ambulance? But I was just, "Come on, Rhys, just look at me, you'll be all right."
Tony never went over to Rhys. He left Mel and Tony come over to me and I was sort of trying to explain to Tony what had happened.
When I saw Steve, he was distraught, he was in tears and, he's probably thinking if we hadn't have had training that night, it wouldn't have happened.
It felt like an eternity till the ambulance arrived. It just felt like an eternity. I was still there, still holding on to him. And then when the paramedics arrive and they're working on him, and I just wanted them to help Rhys. I just wanted them to save him.
I think I was on the M57 driving along when I got a call off Mel, and it was a very, very short call just saying that Steve, you need to come home. Rhys has been shot. And the first thing that went through my mind was that some kids had an air rifle or an air pistol and they, let off a pellet or something and it struck him and, lodged him or whatever it was. I didn't for one instant think that it was a proper firearm that he'd been shot with.
Well, when we got to the hospital, everyone was there waiting for us. They're all working on them, and there's a whole team of people, and you're thinking, oh, it's going to be okay, they're going to... And they allowed me and Steve to go in, and we were rubbing his legs and took his boots off, and we were rubbing his feet, and they were telling us to talk to him, and while they were all working on him, and we were thinking, it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay, because they know what they're doing, and they can see him, but they tried so hard, didn't they?
The doctors desperately persevered to save Rhys, but he never regained consciousness.
I think the hardest thing for us was leaving Rhys in the hospital. We didn't want to go home and leave him there.
You couldn't touch him. He wasn't yours anymore. He was a crime scene.
And we just went home in shock. We just went home, and we were just sitting in Rhys's room, and we just all started crying. We couldn't understand what's happened.
At 6 o'clock, the murder of an 11-year-old boy in Liverpool.
He was shot by another youth on a BMX outside the Fir Tree pub in Croxteth.
He was shot in the neck last night in Croxteth on his way home from football practice. He died later in hospital. And the police say
knows who this killer is. This is not a time for silence. Do the right thing and turn them in.
As the shooting made headline news, across the country there was stunned disbelief. Merseyside police quickly mobilised, determined to find the schoolboy's killer.
It's probably one of the largest murder investigations that Merseyside police has run. The fact that he had no involvement and was an innocent victim in the middle of all this. The pressure was there to solve this offence and to bring the people or person responsible to justice. There's a large number of detectives who were deployed immediately onto it to conduct the outside inquiries. You've got the incident room itself, there's a lot of search teams involved, all the scientists, crime scene investigators.
In the early hours of the investigation, it was clear to the police that the shooting was gang-related.
The Croxteth Park estate itself is about less than a mile from the old Croxteth council estate. We were aware that there was gangs in mainly the old Croxteth estate.
You've got a situation in Liverpool 11 where in effect two close-knit geographical locations, which is Croxteth and Norris Green, are separated in effect by one road. And over the years there has been a number of incidents involving almost like conflict between these two groups, which had escalated and had started to actually use guns.
We were aware of certain things that had gone on in the past, between Norris Green and Croxteth Crew and stuff like that, but we'd never been a part of it. We never witnessed any of it. We just never thought that it'd overspill onto our estate.
The whole scenario of there being gangs on the estate and young boys having guns just seemed a world away from the life that we were living. I just couldn't comprehend it.
I just wanted to understand. I just wanted to know what had gone on, why someone could shoot an 11-year-old boy. Because I knew that Rhys didn't hang around with those type of people. All his mates were all just good lads.
The very next day, Rhys's parents conducted a press conference, pleading for witnesses.
Someone knows who's done it. And I know people must be frightened, but they've got to think that they can't leave this killer out there. It could be their son, it could be their brother next time. Because it'll happen again. If he's not caught, it'll happen again.
As witnesses close to the scene came forward, they described a teenage boy riding a bike.
There were 3 shots fired in total by the gunman on the night. The first one was aimed at 2 lads who were riding their bikes across the pub car park. They then rode off on their bikes, and he's obviously tracked them, aiming at them again, and has fired a second time. That bullet struck Rhys, and then amazingly the gunman continued and fired a further shot, the third shot, still obviously tracking his intended target at that time, even though clearly Rhys had already fallen to the floor, having been struck.
There was eyewitnesses who told us they'd seen the gunman, but unfortunately none of those were able to identify him.
The police quickly obtained CCTV footage of the killer on his bike, hoping it would help their investigation.
The significant piece of CCTV footage that we had and was used in this case was that taken from the pub system itself. That showed the gunman obviously approaching from the rear and going to either side of the pub. At that stage, he's clearly looking for his intended victims. You see him come back across the rear of the pub, and he then comes out the other side, which is at the point where he stood astride his bike and fired his weapon 3 times.
When the gunman left the scene, we knew that he'd driven through the Croxteth Park estate on his bike. He'd crossed over Fir Tree Drive North and was narrowly missed by passing traffic, and across into Dam Wood, which is a wooded area that separates Croxteth Park and the old Croxteth estate.
Unfortunately, it wasn't that clear with regards to the face of the gunman. But what it did give us, which is quite crucial, was the actual dimensions of the bike.
As the killer made off with the gun, the pressure was now on the police to locate the gunman, bike, and the murder weapon.
It was important to identify the offender at an early stage. Obviously, there's a youth out there who's armed, could well use that gun again, or himself could become a target for retribution.
Rhys Jones was shot in the neck on his way back home from playing football in Croxteth, Liverpool. The gunman fled the scene with the murder weapon. His mother, Mel, raced to the scene where she cradled her dying son in her arms. Rhys Jones's death shocked a nation. The local community was struggling to make sense of the tragedy.
Everyone was just staying inside, that, you know, because people were frightened. People were frightened that it was going to happen again, you know, because, you know, if it could happen to Rhys, it could happen to absolutely anybody.
I think the circumstances of Rhys being shot and killed created an element of fear, and rightly so, within the community. People knew that we hadn't arrested the offender. You've got to put yourselves in the position of a parent living in that location and thinking that could have been my child.
You do have an instinct to keep your children safe, especially after something like that's happened. The streets around here were empty of kids.
People on the estate were obviously very protective of their young children. It certainly changed my view on where Sean could go and who he'd play with. I wouldn't let him go 2-3 streets away on his own. If he was going round to his friends, I'd drop him off there and I'd pick him up.
In the early stages of the murder investigation, the police already had a prime suspect. Postings on a social networking site had already named one boy as the alleged killer. 16-year-old Sean Mercer.
You did hear teenagers saying things, and obviously Mercer's name was all over the internet that night.
Mercer had a number of previous convictions, only a small amount for relatively minor crime. There was an ASBO in force against him at the time, but he was well known to the local police as being one of the youths who caused trouble, and he was related to the Croxteth crew.
Rhys was shot on the evening of Wednesday, the 22nd of August. By the Friday, what we had then was a number of pieces of information and intelligence that had come into us to suggest who the potential suspects were in this. By the Saturday, so you're talking 3 days after the murder of Rhys, a number of arrests were made on the morning. Sean Mercer was arrested on that day with a lad by the name of Dean Kelly, as was James Yates.
Mercer, because we thought he was the gunman, was put on an identification parade, and 5 witnesses who'd actually seen the gunman fire the gun across the car park were asked to attend that parade. None of them were able to identify Mercer as the gunman. When Mercer was initially interviewed, he gave a prepared statement through his solicitor, which said he'd been in the company of Dean Kelly, a friend of his, at the relevant time. He also said in that statement that the 2 bicycles we recovered from his house on the Saturday morning were the only bikes that he had. None of those 2 bikes matched the bike that we'd seen on the CCTV of the offender.
The Croxteth crew gang closed ranks around Sean Mercer. Even his mother, Jeanette Mercer, who was present at the police interview, vouched for her son. At this stage in the investigation, there simply wasn't enough evidence to categorically prove Mercer was the murderer.
We know that if these people are going to try and, cover the tracks and hide, we know it's going to be difficult. We know it's going to be a long, hard slog. We just thought, well, we're in for a long haul here.
There was an element of silence around the actual offender, but only carried out by the people who knew and assisted him at the relevant time.
With no actual eyewitness, no murder weapon, and no bike, Merseyside police had no choice but to release Mercer and his accomplices back into the community.
It was frustrating letting Mercer go. Everything at that stage was pointing towards him being responsible for the murder of Rhys. And we knew at that stage that it was going to be quite a long and protracted inquiry.
The name of the offender is being mentioned in the community and was quite widely known.
We specifically asked that we didn't want to know any names from the onset, as that, because there was a lot of rumours going around. There was a lot of, the reasons why and how and stuff like that.
Personally, we didn't want to know. We knew there was names being bantered about, but we didn't want to know until that person was actually charged with Rhys's murder. We didn't want to know.
We had to get the evidence sufficient to charge and build an appropriate case to put before the Crown Court. We just can't put people away whilst we gather the evidence.
If you're the killer and you're watching this, turn yourself in. Similarly, if you know who is the gunman or who put the gun in his hand, do the right thing.
And I think if someone had walked into a police station and held a hand up and said, I'm the person responsible, or, I'm in connection with it, then, it makes things a lot easier, not only for the police, but obviously for us.
Thousands of mourners gathered at Liverpool's Anglican Cathedral for the funeral service of Rhys Jones. The murdered schoolboy was laid to rest. With emotions running high, the pressure was on Merseyside police to find the gun and the missing bike, which would crucially link Sean Mercer to the murder of Rhys Jones. In a desperate bid to uncover the killer's movements, the police pressed on their intelligence to reveal more.
There was 2 calls made to Mercer before the murder of Rhys, and obviously what we would infer from that is that they were calls to say that the intended victim was in the area.
Police used Mercer's phone logs and CCTV footage to establish the sequence of events around the time of the murder.
He left on his bike just after 6 o'clock, and from there he went into the old Croxteth estate, where he was captured on a number of CCTV cameras riding his bike, and we believe he actually collected the gun that he used to kill Rhys from James Yates's girlfriend's house on Croxteth estate.
We established that the offender, having taken possession of the gun, he then went and carried out the shooting, obviously striking Rhys in that process.
Following the shooting, Mercer rode off to the home of a 15-year-old boy, referred to as Boy M.
We believe Mercer chose Boy M's house for a number of reasons. A, it was the closest of his associates to the Croxteth Park estate, so we could get there quickly and get off the streets as quick as possible. And also Boy M was only 15 years old at the time, and while not a member of the Croxteth crew, he had been involved in gang activity. He was young, he had behavioural problems himself, and Mercer knew he could tell Boy M what to do, and Boy M would do it.
It was from Boy M's house that Mercer hatched his plan.
Mercer made a series of telephone calls to his associates, and effectively he called his gang members in to assist him, and they helped by making plans to dispose of the gun, dispose of his clothing, douse him in petrol to get rid of any forensic evidence, and also to get rid of the bikes. It's a belief that petrol will dispose of any of the residue that's discharged from a firearm when you've been in close proximity to it being fired.
But which of the Croxteth crew gang members were involved? Melvin Coy, age 24.
He made a phone call to Mercer about 20 to 7, informing him of the people being present from the opposing group.
Gary Case, age 24.
He made a phone call to Sean Mercer just before 7:10 to alert him to the fact that members of the opposing group were in the area on the pub car park.
James Yates, age 19.
James Yates was an associate of Sean Mercer, and he had actually given the gun to Mercer on the night in question.
Nathan Quinn, age 16.
He attended at the friend's address with James Yates immediately in the aftermath of the shooting of Rhys.
Dean Kelly, age 16.
He's a friend of Mercer, who he was actually with at the time when Mercer was arrested. It was 3 days after the murder of Rhys. Dean Kelly, at that point, gave an alibi, in effect, for Sean Mercer.
On the night of the murder, Mercer, Yates and Quinn got into Melvin Coy's Ford Galaxy. They drove probably 1.5 miles, 2 miles to the Kirby Industrial Estate, where Melvin Coy had access to a lock-up, and it was there that Mercer's clothes were burned and Mercer was cleansed of any firearms residue using petrol. And as a result of examining CCTV, we were able to identify Melvin Coy's Ford Galaxy entering the estate. We did execute a search warrant there. The only things of significance that we found in that lockup were 3 empty petrol cans.
Having quite clearly established Sean Mercer's movements, the police needed to trace what had happened to the murder weapon.
As a result of intelligence that we'd received, a search warrant was executed at the home address of Boy X. In the loft, we recovered a Smith & Wesson revolver, a self-loading pistol and ammunition that fitted both of those guns.
The type of residue that was recovered by the forensic scientists from the gun matched the residue that was recovered from Rhys's football shirt that he was wearing at the time.
Boy X was arrested and interviewed.
He gave us an account that Mercer had phoned him, told him to come to Boy M's house, went into the house and was confronted by Mercer, who gave him the package and told him to take it back and hide it. Our boy X was petrified. He felt intimidated by Mercer.
Mercer called boy X because he knew of him and knew him from the area, but boy X was not a member of the same group that Mercer was. Boy X took the gun to his home address and he left it in the back garden. And then on the Sunday, another associate of the main offender moved that gun into the loft of boy X's address.
With such a crucial statement, Merseyside Police took the unusual decision to file an application with the Crown Prosecution Service to offer boy X immunity.
The use of that legislation is very, very rare, and particularly where a youth is concerned. Witness testimony from boy X was a major part in the inquiry.
The evidence was slowly mounting against Mercer and his gang. As the police were waiting to hear back from the CPS, they still needed to track down a vital missing piece of the evidence that would bring Mercer to justice. In August 2007, schoolboy Rhys Jones was gunned down by a teenage killer riding a bike. Merseyside Police arrested and questioned various youths from Liverpool's notorious Croxteth crew gang, including prime suspect Sean Mercer. But despite having to release Mercer and his gang members as they carried out further investigation, the police were quickly converting intelligence into evidence. Having recovered the murder weapon, the police were now awaiting approval from the CPS to see whether boy X would be granted immunity if he testified against Mercer. But there was still the question of the missing bike.
The bike that Mercer had used, we knew had gone back to his home address later that evening from witness accounts. But from his home address, we didn't know where it had gone, and it remained outstanding.
The police launched a fresh appeal to help trace the bike.
Following our press appeal, a member of the public came forward and said that he'd been cycling himself in the Kirby area near to the industrial estate, and he'd found the bike frame minus its wheels and taken it back. Forensic examination of the bike revealed Mercer's DNA on the bike itself.
Mercer's mother, knowing that he had possession of that bike, she deliberately misled the police during the search by saying that bikes that we recovered at the offender's home address were the only bikes that he owned, and she repeated that fact during a later police interview. There's a huge difference between even believing that her son had done it and actually deliberately lying during police interviews, during the police search, and quite clearly trying to frustrate the police investigation.
We'd recovered the bike frame, we'd recovered the gun, and we had other witness accounts which basically blew Mercer's alibi away.
And the whole estate knows it.
All that remained was a decision from the Crown Prosecution Service on boy X. In April 2008, the CPS had made their decision.
When the Attorney General had made the decision that boy X was going to be offered immunity from prosecution, within days we re-interviewed boy X, obtained his witness account. He entered into the agreement with the Crown Prosecution Service that he would give truthful evidence in return for the immunity from prosecution.
On the 15th of April 2008, Merseyside Police arrested 14 people, including Sean Mercer, James Yates, Gary Kays, Melvin Coy, Dean Kelly, Nathan Quinn and boy M.
And they were subsequently charged, Mercer with the murder of Rhys and the others with assisting him to dispose of evidence. When Mercer was arrested on the 15th of April, he was interviewed again he produced a prepared statement in which he denied any involvement in the murder of Rhys and chose not to answer any further questions. Gary Kays and Melvin Coy basically denied being involved in assisting Mercer. The others, when they were interviewed, there was a mixture of people choosing not to answer questions, saying no comment.
As well as the Croxteth crew gang members, a number of adults were also arrested.
Because we knew Jeanette Mercer had lied to us when she'd made witness statements, saying that Sean Mercer had only had the 2 bikes we'd recovered from the house, and because she had possession of his mountain bike on the night of the murder, a decision was made to arrest her.
He said, at his house?
She denied any involvement.
Unless someone had taken it?
James Yates's parents, Francis and Marie Yates, were heavily involved in trying to assist Mercer and their own son. We know that Francis and Marie Yates burnt a SIM card that the police failed to find when they'd searched James Yates's house, and that was the SIM card that he'd been using at the time, and that was crucial evidence.
I think it was shocking, sort of like the help that they got, and it wasn't, so much as, Mercer and his mates that sort of like, took him away, whisked him away and doused him with the petrol, got rid of evidence, got rid of the bike and stuff like that. But it's the adults that were involved with it as well.
Almost 14 months after Rhys's murder, the trial took place at Liverpool Crown Court. Sean Mercer pleaded not guilty.
Throughout the trial, Mercer and his 6 associates were in the dock and frequently would be laughing and joking and not listening to what was going on.
And it was an 11-week trial, and it was a terrible ordeal for us to go through and to listen to, and you're scared to let your emotions out because you think if you do, you're never going to stop crying. You're never going to pull yourself together again.
I think it's fair to say that the behaviour of Sean Mercer and all those people in the dock with him at that time was poor, to say the least. This was all done in front of Rhys's mum and dad as well. I think that is unforgivable, but I also think it actually shows the type of people that we're dealing with here.
The jury found Mercer guilty of the murder of Rhys Jones. He was sentenced to 22 years in prison.
Mercer showed no remorse at all. Even when he was sentenced, very little emotion on his face.
He's destroyed us. He destroys our life.
In order to get your head around things, you need somebody to be charged. You need somebody to be found guilty. You've got to have a sentence that you feel reflects the enormity of what they've done.
We got justice for Rhys, because as the sentencing goes, Sean Mercer got the maximum what he could get. And in the eyes of the law, we've got justice. But I personally feel life should mean life. He should spend the rest of his life in jail.
These people should realise that, if they're going to go around firing guns and murdering people, then, they should spend the rest of their life in prison.
There does need to be change regarding guns and gangs. But as a parent, I don't know the answers to that. I think the police and the politicians need to sort that out.
I, like any other cop, is going to sit here and say to you that we would like it to be no incident of gun crime. But unfortunately, there are firearms out there. There are people who are prepared to use them.
Something needs to be done. It could start with tougher sentencing, give the judges the tools to do the job, get these people off the streets, get them to learn the lesson that, you know, if you're going to get caught with a gun, you're going to end up with a hefty sentence, and, you know, and make them serve that sentence.
But Rhys's death would not be in vain.
We've set a charity up in Rhys's name. It's the Rhys Jones Memorial Fund. The charity is to raise enough money to build a much needed community centre in Croxteth Park, where we live. Somewhere for all the kids to go, keep them off the streets, keep them busy, give them an interest.
I work quite closely with Steve Gagan, which is, we do a soccer competition each year for the kids. Fair Tree take part, you know, the old lads that Rhys used to play football with, and it's a really, really good competition.
Rhys just lived for football. Everything evolved around football, and in terms of keeping Rhys's memory alive, then the most appropriate way to do it is through football.
I just remember Rhys as being a really bubbly, lovable lad. He'd just make you laugh.
I just remember Rhys smiling. He was always smiling, he was always laughing, always joking around. And he was always his most happiest when he was playing football.
April 1999. London in the UK was the centre of an unprecedented terror attack.
I pulled my hand out and it was like full of blood. And then I put my hand on my head and there was like something sticking out my head.
The blast just caught me.
A lone right-wing fanatic went on a one-man rampage, killing 3 people and injuring hundreds.
I feel nothing. I did what I had to do.
Area within a minute just turned like a war zone.
He left a trail of destruction through the capital, lasting 2 weeks, making this a crime that shook Britain. Saturday the 17th of April, Brixton Market, South London, was packed with weekend shoppers and traders.
I was at Brixton Market because my friends had to go to work up there and I went with them to spend the day.
As Miles MacLeod helped his friend on the market stall, Paul Maskell was managing his staff and customers in a supermarket just yards away.
I was just like the day-to-day managing of the store, doing staff rotas, just normal everyday managing of a retail unit. It was coming to the end of the day, it was all looking forward to going home.
As Paul's day drew to a close, Miles and his friend waited for some extra trade.
Everyone else started packing up kind of early because some people didn't have a good day, but we was going to stay a little bit longer because we didn't have to be anywhere till early evening.
The bustling market was still heaving with people when Miles noticed something suspicious.
I walked down to go to the shop, and then on the way back, I noticed the bag. And I let my friend know, and my friend come over and started walking around the bag, asking people if it was their bag. And they said no. So my friend goes to me, pick it up.
Miles went to investigate, unaware the contents of the bag would change his life forever.
So I picked it up, and then we walked round to Electric Avenue and we opened the bag, and that's when we noticed it was a bomb. I had to actually look twice because you could actually see the nails, the Tupperware box, the batteries, the wires, and then you knew it was an explosive device.
Brixton was still packed full of shoppers, all unaware of what Miles and his friend had discovered.
I took it seriously straight away because I've never seen anything like that before. As soon as I've noticed and I've told my friends to get away, and we started to stop people trying to get people away from it.
As Miles attempted to alert people of the danger, others were not so wary of the device in front of them.
Some people heeded the warnings, others didn't. And one man in particular went up to the bag, it was a nice bag, a head bag, and took the device out of the bag and walked off with the bag.
The little gentleman what was on the fruit stall picked the bomb up from there and put it next to the green bin next to Iceland. But at this time, they thought it was a joke still. They thought it wasn't real. And it got moved 3 times. Me moving the bomb getting taken out of the bag, and then the bomb getting put next to icing.
The makeshift bomb, packed with nails and stuffed into a plastic box, had been sat at Brixton Market for over 30 minutes.
The security guard come in and told me he felt someone had left a bomb outside. I couldn't really take that serious and just carried on the phone call really and ignored him. I could see that he was getting quite agitated about the events that were going on outside. He came in and told me and more or less insisted that I go outside now and have a look to see what was going on out there. And went outside and there was a crowd of people gathering around. We wasn't sure what a bomb would look like. We felt it would be like a big alarm clock with orange sticks underneath it. But this one turned out to be in a shoebox with a Tupperware box on top of it.
Paul, along with the crowd now gathering, wasn't convinced the device was real.
The guy was pointing out to me that there was like nails in the top and you could see wires, and he was convinced that was a bomb and we should do something about it. So I thought the first thing I should do is go and phone the police while the security guard was trying to keep people back. Not too many people at that time were taking much notice of him, and he was doing as best as he could trying to keep people back.
I've seen police across the road, so I've run across the road. I've told him there's an explosive over there, there's a bomb over there, and he got his notepad out and goes, "What's your name and address?"
I went inside the store, phoned the police. They told me I should evacuate the store and keep people away. Yet again, I couldn't really believe it was a bomb, so I took no notice of the police and didn't evacuate the place, and went outside saying this just can't be a bomb. And we got within a few feet of it, and then it went off.
A terrifying explosion has devastated the heart of Brixton in London.
An explosion in South London has injured dozens of people. The blast in Brixton is being treated as a major incident.
A holdall containing more than 1,000 nails and deadly explosives had been planted near the crowded market. The Metropolitan Police had been given no warning and no motive. They were dealing with a ruthless terrorist whose intention was to kill and maim.
Everything went completely black.
The explosion threw Paul Maskell off his feet.
When I came to, I was leaning against one of the freezers in the store, and I thought I'd wet myself. And I thought to myself, am I going to survive the day now where I've wet my trousers? And I put my hand inside my trousers, and I pulled my hand out, and it was like full of blood. And then I put my hand on my head, and there was like something sticking out my head, and I just thought, I just didn't know what was going on there.
It was just havoc. Everyone was running everywhere. There was smoke, glass. It was bad.
There was phone calls coming in that there was a possibility that there was a bomb had been discovered in Brixton near the Iceland store, and just as the information was being relayed, then there was a call to say that it had gone off. There was no warning, there was no suggestion of trying to prevent it happening. It was just armed, put down, and the person that put it down just walked away. They had the time then, they could have made a telephone call, but there was no communication then.
It was just smoke, dust and glass falling. In Brixton High Road, you've got high houses at the top of the shops, and them windows got more affected than any. And it was like raining glass and dust.
There were more than 1,000 nails in the bomb, and of course they cut into people. There were various people had lots of nails in, and in particular a little child had a 4-inch nail stuck in their skull.
Well, the initial priority is obviously rescue and recovery of the injured people. Anything to do with the crime scene waits until that's all been done. We've got the explosion, the site of the explosion, the distance of where all the debris, there was a damaged bus, damaged vehicles that had some of the device inside them, so potential evidence. Eyewitness accounts, even those that weren't seriously injured, were able to tell us what was happening. So as much as CCTV was recovered, many of the systems were poorly maintained or of poor quality, and they were all different. So to play back the different types of CCTV in itself was a headache. But you are then looking eventually at the scene of the explosion to recover what you can, because in most explosions, not all of the device is destroyed, it doesn't all vaporise, there are bits left to recover. And parts of the device were recovered, and that became a major part of one of the lines of the investigation.
Keith Pearce and his officers discovered that the bomb had originally been placed at a bus stop, then moved 3 times before detonating outside the Iceland store. 50 people had been injured as a result of the blast. Remarkably, no one was killed. But officers needed to track down the ruthless culprit, and fast.
The initial pressure, I suppose, is that people want to get the streets back open to normality, the shops want to open again, and people want to go about their business. So the initial pressure is more localised. There is obviously then a local government concern and a national government concern, because bombing is still a fairly rare occurrence in the UK. So there is an issue about what it's about. One thing about bombings is that usually once somebody makes one, they've done it for a purpose or a reason. So it's always thought that can there be another one?
There was a fear. No one knew who was responsible, but the feeling in the community was that this was something to do with race, that Brixton was associated with black people. But the hope was that it was a one-off.
Within days, underground right-wing group Combat 18 came forward claiming responsibility. Police were keen to stress they were looking into other leads, as well as this theory. Hundreds of hours of police time were spent scouring CCTV for any leads, in a rush to find the bomber.
When you're trying to find one person from a busy Saturday afternoon shopping with no particular lead, and no one had identified who put the device down by then, it took all of that week still following the various cameras and the different angles to try and plot the movement of it. It's a very, very long day, slow process.
But the days of painstaking detective work paid off when Keith Pearce and his colleagues finally spotted something crucial on the footage.
The breakthrough came when a man was identified carrying a bag across his back, and then after the explosion, he was seen minus a bag.
This was a major lead. A lone figure cutting through the bustling crowd of shoppers could be the key to the investigation.
He was focused on early on, but the quality of the pictures is nothing like you see today. It was all very grainy, distant. You could just about do the shade of black and white. Very hard, but that was a key start for us.
7 days after the explosion, the community of Brixton were trying to come to terms with the attack. As officers tried to work on the image from CCTV, they continued searching for witnesses.
The key thing the following Saturday, as in many crimes, you go over it again. You have an anniversary event to try and find witnesses who may have been there.
As police searched for further clues to the tragedy, 5 miles across the city on Brick Lane, Dr. Hack and her family were heading home.
We are returning to our North London home. As we are passing near the Brick Lane, suddenly we decided that to do some little shopping and to buy some Bengali newspaper. At that time, I was stopped by one of my patients, and we are chatting. We parked our car on the Brick Lane, and just before 6, as we are just about to return, so we are about to just cross the road. My husband was on the other side. Whole area was really in dark cloud that you could not see what is happening, and My whole body was covered with the glass splinters. All the windows were broken, smashed, and you didn't know what is happening.
We had a team in Brixton at the time, around the 5 o'clock time, to try and jog people's minds. And while that was happening over in Brick Lane, we then had another phone call to say somebody thought that they may have found another device. And at that same time, when the phone calls were being made, a second device had gone off almost similar time, a week later to the one that had gone off in Brixton.
Almost to the hour, 7 days on from Brixton, police were dealing with another terrorist attack. The explosion had ripped through the heart of the Asian community in East London, injuring 13 people and causing severe damage to surrounding buildings.
That was really, really horrific, horrifying, and really, really, I have never experienced like that in my life.
Early indications are that the device had gone off in the back of a car. So, of course, again, one of the initial thoughts was this the bomber with the device in a car that had gone off? And so, therefore, did we have either the bomber with the car or some evidence to be obtained from the car? But we found out fairly early on that, similar to the first device, people do strange things when they come across a bag with a bomb in it. And we weren't to be as lucky as finding the bomb in the bomber's car. It was in an innocent person's car.
Police discovered that the device had again been moved by a concerned member of the public.
The bomb had been left in a side street to Brick Lane. A man had seen it there in a bag, had picked it up, opened it, and seen, again, what looked like a bomb inside.
They thought it may have been a workman's bag with tools. It obviously wasn't, and there was obviously the event the week before. So the person left it in his car, closed the boot, went off to try and find a police station to report he may have found something. And again, just ironically, when the phone calls are being made about, I think I may have found a bomb in a bag, it's in the back of my car, the bomb goes off. So people are injured again by the blast, but the blast is contained within a car, but the car was totally destroyed. So again, just by chance, less people are injured because a member of the public had put it in the boot of their car.
Keith Pearce and his colleagues were now looking for a hardline terrorist, someone waging a hate campaign targeting specific communities. But whoever the culprit was, they weren't giving anything away. Yet again, no warning and no motive had been given.
It was clear with this second bomb in Brick Lane that what was happening was someone out to get the ethnic minorities. Brixton, full of black people. Brick Lane, usually full of Asian people. So here was a racist bomber, or bombers, and they were out to kill and maim people. And it was amazing that up till then, no one had been killed.
The pressure was mounting because this was almost a week later to almost the exact time. We've got a description from the man who found it and put it in his car and had a look at it. So it gave us a bit of an indication, and because people aren't every day making devices and setting off explosive devices, it was a good indicator that it was the same or similar device. And then within the next few days, you can start finding that as an evidential fact that they're the same manufactured type of device.
Police were fairly certain they were now dealing with the same bomber. But with little to go on and with pressure mounting, officers were in a race against time to identify who was responsible. Finally, after sending the grainy image to specialists, they get their first major breakthrough.
I would wish to question this man, who I'm asking people to identify.
The Metropolitan Police have released an image of the most wanted man in Britain. A lone figure they believe is responsible for 2 terrifying explosions in London. Having attacked communities in Brixton and Brick Lane over 2 weekends, officers are in a race against time to catch the culprit before he strikes again.
With the pressure building up after the bombings on the Saturdays, Obviously, there's an obvious consideration, is there going to be a third one on the following Saturday, and hence that's why we decided to go public with the photograph. We had a fair amount of CCTV footage, and it was considered, could it be enhanced, as you see on the television, to get a better quality. It was trying to get a picture that you could at least someone may be able to recognise by just changing the colouring and the shading and the shadow on the picture. And a picture eventually was prepared for a press release.
Despite the poor quality, police believed they had enough for a public appeal. This was now their number one suspect. The image was released to the media in an urgent bid for vital information. With the weekend approaching, there was widespread fear in the capital.
It was clear it was a racist bomber and a serial bomber. So people were worried that there was going to be another attack, a third attack, and the fear was no one knew where that was going to be and who was going to be attacked.
This was the second Saturday. Were we then going to be facing something on the third Saturday?
Despite the grainy quality, officers hoped someone would recognise the man in the image. With a slight build, blue jacket, jeans and baseball cap, his appearance was fairly ordinary. But thankfully, information started to come in.
Photograph generates a lot of calls that have to be followed up.
Incident room.
You have to make a judgment call which have a higher priority than other calls. So the pressure does mount.
Yeah, could I have your number, please?
Long hours of working, knowing that you might be the one that's going to make that breakthrough to find the suspect and hopefully prevent it happening again.
It was released on the Thursday lunchtime following the Brick Lane bomb, and the police had, for all that time since Brixton, been trawling through the CCTV that they had, and they struck lucky eventually because he was wearing a white baseball cap.
From his pattern so far, officers had reason to believe the terrorist would strike again in 2 days' time. If no information came forward from the public, they faced their third disaster in 11 days.
During the course of the Friday, we had an incident room running because of the public appeal, and there were many phone calls coming in.
Police were inundated with calls from people desperate to help. As officers followed up possible leads, one particular call caught their attention.
At about 5:25, was from a man who said that he worked with somebody that he thought was the person in the photograph. It was very vague, but he named him as David Copeland. He identified where he lived, and he based it on the fact that he worked with him.
David Copeland was 22 and from Middlesex. One of 3 boys from a middle-class family, his mother was a nurse and father an engineer.
On paper, there was nothing really to suggest he was going to carry out such crimes.
He just seemed to be a loner, left school. I think the expression was as if he was invisible. He wasn't remembered by many people.
He had no girlfriends. He didn't really have any friends at all. He had an inferiority complex. At school, he was bullied.
It was during his adolescent years that cracks began to appear.
He was, in his mid-teens, already a racist, and he tried to avoid any contact with any racial minority. And he'd also developed a taste for violence. He was a little violent himself, particularly when drunk. He had 3 convictions. They were sort of fairly minor. One was for criminal damage, one for assault on a neighbour, and one for taking something away without paying for it.
Other than his petty crimes, Copeland managed to stay off the police radar, moving to London after leaving school to work as an engineer on the Underground Rail network.
He worked with his father, and the father, when he'd been presented with the photograph of Copeland in the newspapers by a workmate, the father saw the photograph. The workmate said, "That looks like David, your son David." And the father said, "No, it couldn't be. It couldn't be. It doesn't look like him, and anyway, he always wears a dark baseball cap. He hasn't got a white baseball cap."
But Copeland's colleague had his doubts and contacted police. Officers now had a firm lead and had to respond quickly. Meanwhile, across town, Gary Reid was preparing for a night out.
On the day that it happened, it was a day off for me, and a beautiful day. It was the beginning of a bank holiday weekend. I'd had a sort of a lie-in, and I thought, I'll walk into town, see what's going on.
As Gary set off for the heart of London, Tommy Douglas was heading into Soho.
We travelled to the West End, walked round the corner. It was very busy, you know, everybody happy, enjoying themselves. Typical bank holiday, you know. Admiral Duncan opened its shutters.
I had originally intended to wander around and have a look at some of the theatres, and then sort of wind myself home through the back way. I'd heard of the Admiral Duncan. I think I'd been there once. It wasn't the most favourite place in the world, but it was open, and there weren't too many people in it, and I thought, I'll go in for a half.
The Admiral Duncan in the centre of Soho was starting to get busy for the bank holiday. As Tommy, Gary, Nick and friends ordered drinks, Keith Pearce and his officers were desperately trying to find more crucial information about their number one suspect.
Paul Mifsud gave them Copeland's name, said he was fairly sure that he was the bomber, and gave a telephone number for where he was living. The trouble was the person within BT who could check an address against the landline telephone number, he'd gone off for the weekend. The police pressed the urgency of this matter on BT, and the person was contacted at home, had to come back in to find an address, and it was through that that the police went to arrest him.
As officers quickly gathered intelligence, revellers at the Admiral Duncan began to enjoy their weekend.
It was quiet, but the music was going in the background, and as I said, they'd open up the whole front. So there was a warm breeze, there were people chattering. You know, it was a nice atmosphere.
As the pub started to get busier, one of the bar workers noticed something suspicious.
Someone started looking at the bag and wondering about it, and one of the people working behind the bar even in fact looked over the bar down at the bag and was about to inquire whose bag it was as a result of the security briefing they'd been given.
The first inkling I got of anything wrong was a feeling of, first of all, was complete and utter silence. No noise at all. Gone from a bar where there was chattering, there was noise, there was music. Complete and utter silence. I remember a lady, I remember looking up at her, but she had a red beret on, and she caught me before I fell. So I was in her arms, and I was looking up at her, and I could see her mouth opening and closing, and I'm sure she was crying, and I could tell she was screaming, but couldn't hear a thing.
Couldn't move my body. I felt I was nailed to the floor.
People have spoken of individuals being thrown 13 feet by the force of the blast.
And when I went to move anything at all, it was from the waist down was complete pain.
When this particular bomb went off, it destroys the bar where it's near, it brings down the roof, it blows the walls out and then sucks the walls back in, so they're all over the place. People are sitting near the device. In fact, 2 men are killed and a pregnant woman.
I believe that this is linked to the other cowardly attacks that have occurred in London over the last few days.
Despite a nationwide appeal, the terrorist had struck a third time. The device tore through Soho, causing the biggest devastation so far.
Well, I had seen it on television, and then my husband said all this.
lots of people in London that it won't be him, but then he was a bit concerned and we hadn't heard. We tried his mobile phone and he wasn't answering it.
A nail bomb went off tonight in a crowded pub in central London, the third such explosion in the capital inside a fortnight.
The target, a gay pub, the Admiral Duncan in Soho's Old Compton Street.
2 people died tonight when a nail bomb ripped through a packed pub in central London.
A terrifying explosion has torn through a pub in Soho. Of those caught in the blast, one victim is Jeremy Moore's brother, Nick.
My father rang me at about 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning and said, "I think you better come down." You're really at that stage, you're just in a sense of shock and disbelief. It can't happen to us. Why would it happen to us?
Jeremy's brother, Nick Moore, and his friend Andrea Dykes were killed in the blast. Andrea was 3 months pregnant, and her husband Julian was seriously injured. Their best man at their wedding, John Light, also died in the explosion. 142 people's lives have now been devastated by the bombers' terrifying campaign.
People are walking wounded and severely injured by the blast, and the bar itself is now becoming unstable to be in because of the nature of the blast has made it, the roof is coming down and it's very unsafe, and obviously all people want to do is get outside, and there are quite sort of some iconic pictures of people then just sitting on the pavement and being tended by their friends or passers-by while they're waiting to be treated by the ambulance. It's a frustration for us that it happened. It was always a concern that when we went public, would it cause the bomber to stop, or would it change the timetable?
So at that stage, 3 bombs, all aimed against minorities, blacks, Asians and homosexuals. The fear was really increasing because people did wonder in the minority groups whether it was going to be getting too hot for the bomber in London with all the police activity, that the bomber or bombers would be moving to other cities to do bombings there.
The terrorist had waged his hate campaign over 3 weekends. All attacks had been in the capital, but now the rest of the UK was on high alert. Whilst the Metropolitan Police were dealing with the devastation, a team of officers were scrambling to catch the killer.
On that evening, a phone call came into the office and we were told to go down to Hampshire. Once we got the information about the Yard being interested in this bit of information, we went to the door. It just felt like forever that we were knocking, banging. We weren't just knocking at the door, we were knocking on windows. A lady came to the door who obviously was in a very deep sleep.
David Copeland live here?
We asked whether David Copeland lived at the address, and she said, well, there's a David at the address, but I don't know what his surname is. So we walked up the stairs, myself and 2 colleagues, knocked on the door. There was a reply from him, who is it? We identified ourselves as police officers. What do you want? I said, we wanted to speak to David Copeland. Is that you? What do you want to talk about? And I said, well, if you open the door, I'll tell you, and sort of half expecting the door not to be opened, and then I could hear some movement and a bang inside the address, and with the information that we sort of had with them being interested, and somebody being called David in the address, and then the adrenaline sort of started flowing a little bit. The door then opened, and standing in front of us was David Copeland, definitely the person that was on the video, wearing nothing but a pair of blue tracksuit bottoms. And then got in and arrested him straight away for the bombings at Brixton and Brick Lane and the one on the evening at Soho, and straight away, without any prompting, he said, yeah, they're all down to me, I did them by myself.
David Copeland didn't resist arrest and surprised officers with his immediate admission of guilt. But as they searched his bedsit, they discovered evidence that revealed his extreme beliefs.
Straight away, behind was a big red, black and white Nazi flag on the wall, and next to that were cutouts from magazines or photographs of other bomb scenes of people with injuries and the results of bombs, with a whole raft of pictures on the walls.
Alarmingly, his sickening shrine also included pictures from the devastation he'd caused in London.
He said that there was 2 litres of ammonium nitrate, which didn't mean to me, but bearing in mind he just admitted that he was the bomber, there had to be something to do with explosives, and there were some firework boxes underneath the bed. That was an obvious risk. So I spoke to one of my colleagues and said, look, you're going to have to evacuate the houses nearby.
Copeland had purchased large boxes of fireworks, taking out the gunpowder for his devices. He'd also heavily armed himself. Officers found a crossbow and gas-powered pistol in his room. He was rushed back to London for questioning, where he freely discussed his reign of terror. Here is Copeland's actual police interview. Shockingly, he reveals why he planted the bomb in Soho the day before.
Thursday afternoon, when I had over the radio, they got pictures of me.
Where were you at this point, sorry?
In one of these sex shops.
As he left the shop, he saw a copy of the Evening Standard, which had a photographs of the suspect bomber on the front page. He saw that it was him, and he knew or felt that he was close to being captured.
Gone home, back to Farnborough, and I thought I was going to be, grabbed.
That's Thursday afternoon.
That's right, yeah.
So you would have arrived home in Farnborough about what time?
I'll say I got back about 9 o'clock, 8:30, 9 o'clock.
And you expected what?
To be arrested immediately, you waiting for me.
So you stayed in the room?
I went straight
Thursday
in,
night.
packed my bag, left.
Despite his picture being in most of the national newspapers, and a manhunt involving 7 forces up and down the country, Copeland was determined to continue his bombing campaign. He stayed in the capital and brought forward his next attack, this time targeting the gay community.
He wanted to bring the country to the boil, which I have to say he was very close to doing, and getting all communities up in arms. He walked into the pub carrying the device, and it was already armed, as the other two had always been armed when he was carrying them. But he changed his appearance. He no longer had the dark jacket or the baseball cap. He now just had jeans on and a white T-shirt. A lot of the bars and places had been visited with security about being aware of unaccompanied bags being left lying around. But the unfortunate thing in the pub in question, many people had put down sports bags and rucksacks. They were having a nice time. It was a nice early evening.
That spot was the only empty spot at the bar. I went up to get a drink, and I slipped it off my shoulder and put it on the floor.
During all of the times that we had dealings with Copeland, he showed no remorse for any of the injuries or any of the deaths. He thought it was a means to an end. The only time he asked about anything was about this rat Whizzer. How was Whizzer being looked after?
I feel nothing. I don't feel sadness, but I don't feel joy. I did what I had to do.
Are you sorry?
I'm sorry for the woman and the child. I think the woman was pregnant. I feel sorry for her. But I don't feel no guilt for the others.
Copeland gloated over his actions and showed little remorse during his 4-hour interrogation.
Murder, mayhem, chaos, damage to get on the news. It's a top story, really. Personally, I wanted to get caught.
Why?
To be famous. If no one remembers who you were, you never existed.
During his lengthy interview, Copeland also revealed the circumstances leading up to the attack on Brick Lane.
Why Brick Lane?
It's like the heart of the Asian community. I don't like them. I want them out of this country. I'm a National Socialist, Nazi, whatever you want to call me.
There was speculation that the bomber could have intended it for the Brick Lane market, but maybe assuming that the market took place on the Saturday. In fact, it didn't take place on a Saturday, it was on a Sunday. If it had gone off at the time of the market, then it really would have caused much more in the way of injury.
Copeland also held strong beliefs about the Brixton community.
I presume that it was at the heart of the black community.
Right.
I presume that Brick Lane was the heart of the Asian community.
Right.
But I do predominantly say that the white race is the master race.
There was no doubt the bomber held extreme views. Police were keen to establish whether he had acted alone in his hate campaign, and did uncover a dark past connecting him to right-wing organisations.
He'd got involved in extreme right-wing groups like the BNP and a Hitler-loving group called the National Socialist Movement. He'd become the southern unit leader of that group. They worship Hitler. As well as all that, he'd got involved in groups that believe in Christian identity, and that is people who believe that white Europeans are the chosen race and everyone else is inferior. The Daily Mirror had been given a photograph of Copeland at a BNP demonstration in 1997, showed him standing next to the then leader, John Tyndall of the BNP, and the anti-fascist groups had attacked this meeting and missiles had been thrown, people had been injured. There was Copeland next to the leader of the BNP. The BNP at that stage weren't providing him with any action, so he drifted away from them.
We knew he'd had some connections with some right-wing organisations, as they like to put it, but none of those had any connection with Copeland. Copeland had had some association with them, but there was no other involvement. There was no other witnesses or evidence, either from the CCTV or witnesses that had been involved, with him making the devices. He told us early on that he'd made them by himself. He'd learnt it from the internet.
Well, I'm responsible.
Right. Yeah. Just you?
Just me on my own.
Are you trying to hide anyone else? Anyone else's involvement in it?
No.
Sure?
100% positive.
Copeland was adamant he had acted alone, but officers were keen to establish where he got his information on explosives from and how he had created such devastating devices.
The devices he made were quite crude, but as we know, crude devices can still be deadly. He adapted the component parts that you can find in fireworks, albeit that he bought them in large numbers.
Copeland spent hours sourcing materials and testing his makeshift devices, seemingly unfazed by the danger to him or his neighbours.
Got everything you want?
All of the items that he made, he used for the component parts he bought in any shop that you and I can go to.
Where did you practice this in?
Just in my bedroom.
What, did you set off small explosions?
Tiny little bits at a time.
Yeah. Anywhere in particular in your room?
It's all on my desk.
Did it leave a mark on the desk?
There's got loads of marks on the desk.
Any particular desk?
There's one desk, it's just a dresser or something.
How did you ignite these little bits of powder?
Cigarette lighters.
They were just wires, powder, nails for shrapnel, a box to put them in, a bag to carry them in, connecting them up, and he used a simple clock.
Copeland led a one-man trail of destruction through the capital of the UK.
David Copeland, on the 3 counts of murder and 3 of causing explosions, how do you plead? Guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
The public must be protected from you and assured that if you are ever released, it will not be for a very long time. I sentence you to 6 life sentences, 3 for murder and 3 for causing explosions in Brixton, Brick Lane and Soho. Officer, take him down.
14 months after the London nail bombers' campaign of terror, 6 life sentences were passed down to him, with a recommendation he should spend a minimum of 35 years in prison. Despite severing connections with right-wing organisations, we will never know how much they influenced his beliefs.
It was a senseless crime, and I don't think we will never get over it. There's not many days go past without some remembering, some looking out the window and thinking of my brother. But the way we have sort of coped with this is the love and the friends that we've actually made through this tragedy.
I thought I was dead. I thought, I must be going to heaven. And then the next thing, I woke up in St Thomas's Hospital, menaced to legs.
David Copeland has not achieved his aims of fame and power. Today's verdict proves he is a dangerous, pathetic nobody who is now where he belongs. When I thought about what he'd done to my parents and to the people that had loved me, what he'd put them through when I was hanging on by the skin of my teeth to life, that's when I got, I got quite angry at him then. The rest of the time when I went to his trial, saw how pathetic he was, what a waste of a life his.
I was dealing with him by letter. It was clear that he was proud of what he'd done, and he really thought that he was going to be the spark that would cause racial conflict, and eventually that would lead to the installation of some extreme right-wing government. He really believed this.
I went back to Brixton and I just couldn't cope with the pressures of that place anymore. They put me into a different store. I couldn't cope with the pressures of that one. I couldn't cope with everyday life issues. And eventually I got retired on the grounds of ill health.
I don't even think of him at all. I'm very, very pleased that he's locked up, and he's, surely to God he won't be let out.
Everybody's got their life to live, and how they live it and who they are, it's up to them. You don't kill people for being what they are.
I think the British people have a right to everything claims. I can have it, I have to do it. I'm not going to sit here and lie to you, but they're dead, they're dead. I feel nothing. Terrorism, fear, to terrorise people.
David Copeland, the young fanatic who worshipped Adolf Hitler and planted nail bombs across London, is in Broadmoor tonight, starting 6 life sentences. He may never be released.